Can you tell me the story about you raced at Whiteman Stadium?
Oh
And
yeah.
I guess beginning of the races, they didn't have Stewart, picking the balls out of the hat
Yeah.
like Ryan
And
Evans
he
does. I actually used to have to fight for your pole position. So the first guy that got bumped off had to race for the spot. So tell me what happened with you and Sonny
yeah.
Nutter.
Well, that's how I recall it. Is that they didn't have Mike Capolite was a pit steward, and so when the races when it would end, then they tell you you could fire up your bike and go, to the starting line. But there was no, I don't remember at all that you later, but you didn't draw a number. It was the first race was from the pits to the starting line. Whoever got there first got their pick us where they wanted to start. And I remember this particular race. I told my dad, "Come on, we got to get going here." And he fired that thing, and I raced out there, and I got to the pole. I was on the pole, and everybody else was in line. And all of a sudden, Sonny comes up, and he lines up inside up on the infield, and he looks over at me, and he gives me a one of these like move over, and so I'm thinking to myself, what do I do? I was here first. Why do I have to move over? Because it's Sonny. And I was young and green, and I was 18, and I only been doing it for a short time, and I did move over. I'll never forget though looking over at him and looking at him. I'm thinking, what is he doing? He's on the infield, and but it was his way to intimidate us and tell me, hey, I'm Sonny Nutter. I'm a star here. You move over. So I think I probably did. But I got back at Sonny, and he'll tell you, I'm the only guy. He's only had stitches one time in his life, probably more than that now, but when he was racing. And I was the one that gave him about, I think, 5 or 6 stitches in his ankle. He always blames me for. He remembers it. I don't know if I ran over him or used him for what. I don't really remember, but he remembers. Every time I see him, he goes, "Yeah, you're the one that gave me all those stitches in my leg." I said, "Well, sorry."
Well, you were a wild man, a young wild boy when you were a racer. You were kind of like, I read this story with Larry Huffman. In fact, I have it right here. I have it right here. It's a program 72. I just did that on my last show. And it had an interview with you and Larry Huffman. And Larry Huffman said that he asked you all these questions, and Huffman said, you had quite a few ups and downs. You seemed, whenever you start and got out front, you would crash, and you would have some injury to slow you down.
Yeah,
You're
true.
A wild boy.
Yeah, I know. Well, like I told you, I think I would have benefited a lot more if I would have had a few more years of racing season. But yeah, I was either going to win or die. It's kind of like, and I remember one night I got hooked up with Mike Conley. I crashed on the back straightaway, kind of a big window thing, and I knocked the wind out of me, and I kind of jumped up, and I wanted to get off the track, and I couldn't run, so I just rolled over the fence and lay down there on the concrete on the other side of the fence, and all these kids came running over. And they're looking down at me, and I'm just like laying there. And one kid goes, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" So like hoping that I was done for, so they could see some dead person that was racing. And I said, "No, I'm not dead." So I got up and hobbled off the track. But yeah, I had my share of crashes, and I think that probably really hurt my career because then I got too cautious. I didn't want to fall down, which is never a good sign when you're trying to win races. So I think that's probably why I didn't last until I was only like 25.
Yeah, well, you were a good rider. You had some good rides, and you really had some good races. You were like Dyson with all the big boys. You were like, you were getting crazy maybe a little bit, but you were fighting those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I was a good rider. I was like on the average, probably a 30-yard. On the handicaps, probably 30-yard guy. I got to the 40 a couple times. 20s, 30s is where I spent most of my time. And, I had some I had some wins, like anybody, and I always tell everybody else, hey, if it wasn't for the guys that were a little bit slower, then the fast guys wouldn't have anybody to beat, would they? So I think that's just the way it is. I had some talent, I had a lot of desire, but my talent was only going to carry me so far. But I remember riding at Paris. Scott Autry was out there, Gary Scott was out there, um, Freddie Edwards, Steve Nichols, a lot of guys. A guy named Dave Ham, who was I ended up buying his Hodaka later on, so it was faster than mine. I had a little stock Hodaka, and so I know a lot of these guys, they would graduate from the Paris and Elsinore, and they would move on to Ascot for on the half mile, which is what I wanted to do also. But in 1968, I think it might have been even late '67, my brother Bruce, who was racing at Ascot at the time, and he had been there a couple of years, he was part of a group of guys that got invited, or they started racing at Whiteman Stadium, and they had these old JAP, these old Jap motorcycles, these old Speedway bikes that had been taken out of the mothballs, had been, sitting, silent for many, many years. And Jerry Fairchild, or maybe his son, Brian, I think, they started bringing these bikes out.
Butch. His name is Butch, his brother. Butch?
Was it Butch? Yeah, Butch. Butch Fairchild. That's right. I was young. That was a long time ago. And but my brother was working for a guy named Joe Kubicek, who was the Jawa importer. And so he had a Jawa. So we went out to watch him race at Whiteman, because all the guys that raced at Ascot on Friday night, a lot of them came out to start racing at Whiteman on Saturday night, just for fun. It was not a lot of money involved, but it was just something different. And I went out there and watched him, and I just fell in love with it. The first time I saw it, I went, man, this is so cool. And it wasn't long after that my dad showed up one afternoon with a brand new Jawa on the back of the pickup truck. And it was $750. It came with a parts kit, included a parts kit, which was a connecting rod, valves, piston, wrist pin, all kinds of parts, valve springs. That was all included in the purchase of the motorcycle, with a couple sprockets also. And that didn't take long for Joe Kubicek to figure out that he didn't have to give that away. So that all the parts used to go into stock, and he'd sell them to you later. But at that point, it was so fresh and so new that they hadn't figured out it was time not to give the parts kit away with the purchase of the motorcycle. So for $750, you got a brand new 500cc Java. And they were the ones that were supposed to go to Australia, because they had a 2-speed box. And they had a first gear and a second gear, but you never used first gear unless you were going to race like a half mile. And so that's how we got started.